Hey everybody, Eric Grenier from the Writ.ca, back for another edition of the Writ Show. Hope you're all holding up well as we enter the halfway point of this campaign. We'll just take another look at where the polls are, do a quick update, quick go-around of the national polling portrait and how it looks as we go across the country. All right, so these are the latest polling averages from the poll tracker that I'm running for the CBC. You can see that the Liberals are still holding with around 44% support. They've been pretty steady at around that 44% for the last little while. We haven't actually seen much movement in the polls since the first week of the campaign when things moved to where we find them right now, and that's with a 7-point lead, give or take, for the Liberals over the Conservatives, who right now have 37.1% in our polling average. 8.5% for the New Democrats. They have also stabilized at around that level, somewhere between 8 and 9%. Again, a stable level of support that we've seen for the NDP. The Bloc Québécois has been at 5.4% nationally. The Greens are 2.4%. And the support for the People's Party and other parties, 1.7% and 0.9%. In terms of who would win the most seats right now, it is still the Liberals. The projection that my projection model is putting out is 201 seats for the Liberals, 116 for the Conservatives, 20 for the Bloc Québécois, 5 for the NDP, 1 for the Greens. If we look at the likely ranges, which take into account the potential for the polls to be off a little bit and also for the projection model to be off a little bit, it's never going to be 100%. You can see that the Liberals have between 180 and 215 seats, so that is well above majority territory. You need 172 for a majority government in Canada, 105 to 131 for the Conservatives, so very solidly in that official opposition position. And then 14 to 23 seats for the Bloc Québécois, 2 to 14 for the New Democrats, and 0 to 2 for the Greens. This produces a pretty high odds that the Liberals would win a majority government. Right now, we project that 87% chance that if the election were held today, the Liberals would emerge with at least 172 seats, a 12% chance that the Liberals would win a minority government, but not a majority, and only really a 1% chance that the Conservatives would win the most seats. And it's for the same reason that I've been saying for the last few weeks, that if the Conservatives are 7 points behind the Liberals, they need the polls to really be off for them to win if the election were held today. That doesn't mean that things can't change between now and Election Day, but with a 7-point lead in the polls nationwide, you would not expect that the Conservatives could pull off a surprise on Election Day. That the polls would have to be off by a lot, probably at least 10 points in order for the Conservatives to win more seats than the Liberals. That is just not a very likely outcome, and that's why we only project a 1% chance that we could wake up on the day after the election, if it were tomorrow, and find ourselves with the Conservatives in power. So now let's look at where things stand across the country, starting with British Columbia and in Alberta. We see that the Liberals are leading in BC with just over 43% support. The Conservatives have just under 38%, and the NDP is nearly 13% support. Again, this has been a pretty steady lead for the Liberals in BC now for a little while. In Alberta, we see 55% support for the Conservatives, 31% for the Liberals, and 9% for the NDP. And again here, not a lot of movement, but that 31% for the Liberals, that keeps ticking up. And it does raise the question of how many seats can the Liberals actually win in Alberta? Now, if we look at Saskatchewan and Manitoba, the Conservatives are leading there, 49% support. The Liberals have 34.5%. The NDP has about 12%. I've gotten some questions in the past why Saskatchewan and Manitoba are combined in this prairie region. It's because most of the pollsters actually combine Saskatchewan and Manitoba together because they're both provinces with relatively small populations that in a national poll of 1,000, 1,500 people, the sample for each individual province would be too small to really report. The margin of error would be too big. But of the polls that we have seen that separate out Saskatchewan from Manitoba, we see a very big lead for the Conservatives in Saskatchewan, a much closer race in Manitoba. In Ontario, we have right now a 48.5% for the Liberals, 38% for the Conservatives, a 10-point lead right now in Ontario. That's really the ball game when you think about it. 8% support right now for the New Democrats. And in Quebec, we have the Liberals leading with 43% support. The Bloc Québécois is in second with 24%, the Conservatives at 23%, and the NDP at 6%. We actually have seen a little bit of movement in Quebec over the last little while. Some questions actually what's going on. We saw some polls that are starting to put the Liberals getting close to 50% in the province, and we're starting to see that those numbers have dropped down a little bit. The Bloc Québécois had been passed by the Conservatives in the poll tracker a few days ago, but we've seen a few better numbers for the Bloc over the last little while, so they've gotten back into that second place, although it is pretty narrow. We also see in Atlantic Canada that the gap might be closing a little bit. 54% for the Liberals to 34% for the Conservatives, still a 20-point lead, and 8% support for the NDP. So I want to talk about how much movement there have been in the polls lately. Clearly, if we look since the last election, lots of movement. You can see that there. But if we reduce the time period to, let's just say, not too long before the campaign began, you can see that there has been some stability in the numbers for the last little while. We see some individual polls that come out showing a closer margin, sometimes a wider margin. But generally speaking, when you average them all out, the Liberals and the Conservatives have reached their cruising altitude, I would say. And so the NDP has also hit its floor. Now, we did see today, on Wednesday, that there was a poll that came out from Abacus Data, and this is the last polling firm that was still showing a neck-and-neck race between the Conservatives and the Liberals. Innovative Research Group had been another one of the pollsters that had been showing that neck-and-neck race. A few days ago, they showed a poll that had a 6-point lead for the Liberals, and now we see from Abacus Data, the last poll that had a gap of 0 points between the Liberals and the Conservatives, they too are now showing a 6-point lead for the Liberals. So there's now no major pollster showing the Conservatives ahead or tied with the Liberals. Every single pollster is giving a lead of at least 3 or 4 points, and we've seen some gaps as wide as 10 or 12. I think somewhere around that 7-point gap that the polling average is showing is probably closer to the mark. Now, there's one poll I actually wanted to show one of the results from that I thought was quite interesting. This was a poll from Leger, and they asked people, who do you think is actually going to win the election? If you asked this question at the beginning of the year, it was a vast majority of Canadians thought the Conservatives would win the election. And when you look at where the polls were at the beginning of the year, it made sense. Now we see that this is the same question from Leger asking, who do you think is going to win the next federal election? It's now 52% who believe that Mark Carney's Liberals will win the election. Only 27% think Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives will win the election. So the idea that the Liberals are not only leading but likely to win has started to penetrate into the general population. People do expect at this stage that the Liberals are the favorites to win. I think this is a significant number to see because there was some discussion about whether we would see a pullback in Liberal numbers if people suddenly realized that the Liberals were on track to win, that they were going to get that 4th mandate, and that Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives were no longer likely to take power. Instead, what we're seeing that even with polling showing the Liberals ahead, that same poll is still showing that most people think the Liberals will win. And if we actually break it down by partisanship, you see that here in the Leger poll, I'll zoom in so you can see it a little bit better, that you have 86% of Liberal voters think the Liberals will win, 65% of Conservative voters think the Conservatives will win, but 20% now think the Liberals will. And perhaps most significantly, you see that 61% of NDP voters and 74% of Bloc voters think that the Liberals will win. So this is showing that there has been a real shift in how people are perceiving this election campaign, and I think that will have an impact on how people are going to be looking at the leaders, the parties, everything over the next 2.5 weeks. So that's an interesting development to see that the Liberals are now seen as the likely winner by a majority of Canadians. As always, ask for a few questions from viewers of the YouTube channel, and we got a couple here, and I got 2 actually from Mark Lyron and from Joe Sam Young. They were similar questions about talking about internal polling that is done by parties. So Mark was asking about what my thoughts were about some polling we've seen from the Green Party and just in general the validity of party commission polls. And Joe Sam Young was asking what is the difference between an internal party poll and a public poll. First, what's the difference? There's not really a difference. They're the same polling methodology. When you see a poll that is being published, commissioned by a party, they're asking a pollster to do the same thing that a media outlet is. So there's not really a difference between the way a poll is done if it's a party poll versus a media poll. Now, a party poll might ask some different questions, might try to get at things that might help them develop strategy. They might also target specific ridings or regions and that a media poll might not do. So, for example, the question from Mark was about polling that was being done by the Green Party. The Greens have commissioned some polls in ridings where they are in contention. They want to know what's going on there, and also they want to fight against some of the narrative that they don't have a chance to win those seats. Now, the question about whether you can trust them, what I think about them, they're as reliable as any other poll. But here's the thing. If you're seeing it, it's because the party wants you to see it. So we don't know if there are polls that they'd commission that show them in a bad position, that show them losing. Those don't see the light of day, but only the polls that are good for the party do we see. So you get a little bit of a confirmation bias here, that we only are going to see internal party polls that the parties want us to see. It gives us a slanted view of things, not necessarily an accurate one. Doesn't mean that the poll is not well done, but it does mean that we're only seeing it because it's good for the party that's showing it to us. Also got this question from Monique. What about Nunavut and the Northwest Territories? Great question. I don't talk about the territories on the Writ Show. I don't really talk about them anywhere because we don't really know what's going on there. There is no polling that is done in the North. Once in a while, we will see a poll that has a crosstab for the territories, but the sample size is usually 3 or 4 people. It's not a useful poll in it by any means. So we don't actually know what's happening in terms of public opinion in Nunavut, the Northwest Territories, or Yukon because we don't get any polls for them. And they are smaller ridings in terms of population, huge ridings in terms of geography. And it's hard to know exactly what to make of what are going to be the issues that are going to decide those elections. The way that my model makes projections for the North is that it takes the trend line we see across the country and applies it to the results in the northern ridings from the last election. So in the current context, the Liberals are up nationally, the Conservatives are up a little bit, the NDP is down a lot. So in the northern ridings, the projection model assumes that the Liberals are up, the Conservatives are up, the NDP is down, and makes some estimates that way. It'd be great to have some polling in the North. It would be a tough place to poll, though, but we'll see what's going to happen in those 3 ridings in northern Canada. All right, that'll be it for this episode of The Writ Show. As always, if you want to leave some questions for me to answer for the next episode, you can do that in the comments. It's going to be a busy few days over the next little while. It's debate time next week, which means we know the parties are going to be prepping for them. And so we'll be looking out for those on April 16th and April 17th in French, in English. Really, I think, could be turning points in the campaign, or they could just keep the trends going in the same direction they're currently going. But anyway, we're in the last half of this election campaign. Thanks so much for tuning in. You can like and subscribe this channel. You can check out more from me at thewrit.ca. I have daily newsletters. I have seat-by-seat projections that are there for paid subscribers. So you can head over there to check it out and support the work I'm doing. All right, until next time, thanks for watching.